Good morning. The subcommittee will come to order. I'd like to welcome all of you to today's hearing for the Natural Resources Conservation Services FY17 budget request. And we have as our guest today Mr. Jason Weller, Chief of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and Mr. Mike Young, USDA's Budget Director. So welcome both of you. NRCS has requested a total of $860 million in discretionary funding for its salaries, expenses, programs, and activities for 2017, increase of $9.5 million over FY16 enacted level. In addition, about $3.8 billion will be available through the 2014 Farm Bill's mandatory conservation programs to help farmers, ranchers, private forest owners preserve and protect their land. As we move through this year's appropriations process, I've said on many occasions that we have four main goals for the subcommittee. First, to increase oversight efficiency and the need for effective outcomes, and second, to keep rural America vibrant. Third, to support American farmers, ranchers, and producers. And number four, to protect the health of people, plants, and animals. The work of the NRCS does to support a nation's producers helps to accomplish several of these goals. NRCS's locally led, science-based, and voluntary approach to conservation have been extremely successful in recent years. The investments we make in farm and conservation programs in the upcoming fiscal year will benefit all Americans, from farmers and ranchers in the fields to consumers in the United States and across the world. It is this subcommittee's responsibility to ensure that the discretionary funds that are appropriated, in addition to the mandatory funds provided in the Farm Bill, are adequate to ensure the effective implementation of new and existing conservation programs. The subcommittee has been following closely the implementation of the Conservation Delivery Streamlining Initiative, for which we provide a $5 million increase in FY 2016. Chief Weller, I would like to congratulate you and your staff on the successful rollout of Phase 1 of the program, the Conservation Client Gateway, and look forward to getting some updates on that program as we move forward through the hearing. Over the past several years, this subcommittee has been focused on the numerous OIG audits related to NRCS financial management systems. Effective financial management is enormously important for ensuring the integrity of NRCS operations and programs, and we appreciate the work you have done to bring NRCS's financial and accounting systems into line with today's transparency and accountability standards. NRCS funding covers discretionary and mandatory programs totaling an estimated amount of $4.75 billion. The scale and importance of the programs under your purview make it imperative that you will keep working to eliminate the three remaining material weaknesses and eventually gain a clean opinion. Again, would like to thank you all for both of you for being here today. I would now like to recognize Ms. Pingree from Maine for any opening remarks that she would like to make at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I don't have any formal opening remarks, but I want to welcome you to our committee and look forward to discussing with you many important topics to our farmers and our land conservation interests around the country. So thank you for the work you do, and I'm sure this will be an interesting morning. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to recognize you, Chief Weller, for your opening statement, and of course, without objection, your entire written testimony will be included in the record, but of course, we'd like to hear from you to make some opening statements, and then we'll go into the question portion of the hearing.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's great to see you again. I really appreciate, let me just start with, this committee's support and leadership and your investment and trust in NRCS in helping to fund and oversee America's voluntary working lands conservation programs. I'm very proud of the work that NRCS does, and I'm very honored to represent the 10,000 women and men that work across the United States out of 2,800 field offices and state offices around the country. I think, and from your, Mr. Chairman, from your opening remarks, I too am proud, and hopefully this committee is proud of the work being done on our behalf through the programs and authorities this committee affords. And I'd like to just touch a little bit upon some of the unprecedented historic results that NRCS and its partners are delivering across the country. So if you look, for example, at soil, here in the Chesapeake Bay region, the voluntary approach works. We've worked in partnership with dairymen, forest land owners, row crop producers across Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, the other three states in the Chesapeake Bay region. And together we've helped reduce soil erosion by over 62% over the last decade. And that results in about 15 million tons less topsoil washing into the Chesapeake Bay region on an annual basis. If you look at soil health, we're helping producers put in place millions of acres of cover crop and soil health management systems across the country, which is improving the resiliency of America's soils to withstand extreme weather, including drought. So producers can boost and maintain their yield, but also prepare for changing and variable weather across the United States. If you look at water quantity, Mr. Yoder in Kansas been over the Ogallala Aquifer. We've made millions of dollars in investments with producers in the Ogallala region, and we estimate on an annual basis these water conservation investments are reducing water demand by over 489 million gallons a year, which is enough water for 3.3 million households every year. It's a huge quantity of water which is now being kept in the ground, helping to extend the life of the aquifer, but also helping producers be as productive as possible with the limited resources. You look at water quantity, or water quality. In Arkansas, in Oklahoma, in Louisiana, we've made focused, targeted investments in partnership with landowners, with operators, and it's improved water quality to the extent these states are able to delist stream segments and rivers, improving the health of these waters for aquatic wildlife, but also for people. We're taking them off EPA's 303D impaired water lists because of the targeted approach, the collaborative approach we take with farmers and ranchers. You look at air quality in California's Central Valley. We've taken over 2,100 old polluting tractors off the farm fields, replaced them with clean technology tractors that have offset NOx emissions, nitrous oxide emissions, which are precursors to particulate matter, which is really bad for human health, and also a precursor for ozone. That's equivalent to taking over 1 million cars off the roads of California's highways every year, helping agriculture attain the state's implementation plan for air quality years ahead of schedule. The only industry, agriculture, the only industry to meet the targets ahead of schedule. You look at wildlife habitat, just in the last year and a half alone, because of the targeted investments, the voluntary collaborative approach that NRCS and landowners are making, we've been able either to take off the endangered species list or prevent from getting on the endangered species list 6 species, including the New England cottontail rabbit, Ms. Pingree's region of the country in New England and New York, greater sage-grouse, bi-state sage-grouse populations, the Louisiana black bear, Arctic fluvial grayling, which is a fish up in Montana, the Oregon chub out in Oregon. All these species have been brought back from the brink of extinction because of the voluntary collaborative approach. And then I'm really proud of how NRCS and its partners are improving access to the programs this committee affords. So when we came in this administration in 2009, if you looked at the number of contracts, the financial assistance we're providing to socially disadvantaged and limited resource producers, on average every year we provided about 2,400 contracts a year. Through hard work, outreach, education, and doing just that one-on-one quiet conversation with these landowners, bringing them into the USDA program suite. Today, we enroll over 6,400 contracts a year. So over the last 7 years, we've invested over $900 million on one-on-one contracts with these landowners to help them get conservation assistance, improve their yield, help them better withstand drought or weed pressures, and be more successful both from a natural resource standpoint, but also from an economic success standpoint. I'm really proud of the NRCS mission. I'm really proud of the work we do. And again, I really appreciate this committee's commitment to private lands, voluntary, incentive-based conservation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your work, as I say, on a day-to-day basis, and of course, your enthusiasm for your job, and that you take great pride in your work. So that says a lot. So we do appreciate that. Information technology programs are too often areas where we make massive expenditures of taxpayer dollars and receive unclear results. We sometimes miss milestones happen and unmet performance goals in return. It's encouraging that the NRCS's new Conservation Delivery Streamlining Initiative has not been one of those programs. Last year, the NRCS rolled out the Conservation Client Gateway, the first of 3 parts of the Conservation Delivery Streamlining Initiative, and NRCS has proposed level funding for the program in FY 2017. Question would be, how many producers have enrolled in the Conservation Client Gateway as of today?
So as of today, the latest report I got actually last night was 729 producers nationally. So this is well below, frankly, expectations. So let me talk a little bit, though, Mr. Chairman, about what this is, just for members of the committee. So it's a mouthful, the Conservation Delivery Streamlining Initiative. CDSI is the acronym. What this really is a long-term investment, trying to overhaul not just the technology, but really the business process of NRCS. And the principle is pretty simple. We want to provide better service to customers, to farmers and ranchers, and really empower them, give them access to their business information so they can run their conservation business from home, much like they can do their banking, they can file their taxes, they can order equipment and inputs for their operation. Well, they should also be able to manage their conservation business online too. But we also want to then free up our field people from instead of having our agronomists and our hydrologic engineers and our foresters and range conservationists expecting them to be contract managers, we want them to be conservationists. So we're trying to get them back out of the field. So instead of being in the office being paper managers, we want them back in the field to be natural resource managers. And so we think the system is going to free up both the time of our customers, but also the time of our professionals, but also ultimately do a better job, Mr. Chairman, in your opening remarks, talking about ensuring good, transparent, but effective financial management. So the CDSI, the first component was the client gateway, which we released about last summer and opened that up. And what this allows for an NRCS customer is to sign up online, and then they can manage the NRCS business online from the comfort of their home or their office. So they can schedule appointments, they can review their contracts, they can review their payments, they can review their conservation plans, they can apply for program assistance, all online. And that also then allows our field office, before we come out to your farm, we already know what you're interested in working on, we know what programs you're interested in, so we show up, we're going to be well informed, we're going to have the right targeted assistance for you. So it really helps our people be better customer service providers. We're then hoping, so with investments the committee hopefully has provided us already in 2016 and then in 2017, we want to roll out the next two components of CDSI, which is the Conservation Desktop, which is our internal planning suite, which aligns all of our tools and GIS, geospatial capabilities. So instead of all of our field people having to do multiple data entries and wasting a lot of time, all that is seamlessly built up for them using our existing databases. So it frees up staff time to go back to what they're supposed to be doing, is that one-on-one customer service. And the third component is then the mobile planning tool, which use a laptop or a mobile device to get out in the field, where then we can in real time do conservation planning in the field with you using great state-of-the-art geospatial technology. Sign you up for a program on the spot, give you enroll you in a program, and get already the contract flow going behind the scenes. So we'll provide quicker, more accurate service for producers, but ultimately we estimate it's going to free up thousands of staff years worth of time that currently is spent on administrative tasks back to doing effective conservation planning.
What's the feedback you're getting?
So from producers that are enrolled, they're really appreciative. They really like it because it's saving them time. So especially in states like in Montana, where the counties are huge, and to get to a local field office in some cases will take hours of driving time. It ultimately, to have a producer not have to drive into the field office to sign paperwork, they can sign the paperwork online. That's a huge time savings and big cost savings to them, not having to take time off the farm, managing their livestock, managing the operation, or just frankly burning gas on the way into the field office. But also, they like it because it organizes all their information, all their paperwork. So instead of them having to keep track of all their conservation plans and receipts, it's all done for them on this online system. And our field people like it too. So in September, at the end of the fiscal year, for our field staff, a lot of times what a local district conservationist committee is doing is actually chasing farmers around in the field where these guys are trying to harvest in their combines, trying to get signatures to get them enrolled. Now, again, our field people don't have to do that. They can all basically send emails, updates, requests, send the guy a text, hey, can you just, when you come in from the combine tonight, can you just go online and click yes, we'll get you enrolled. So it's a time savings for farmers, but also it's a time saving for our field people.
And when, by the second and third phases of the CDSI, when will that be online?
So this year, this summer, what we've been doing the last year is designing the architecture and the business requirements, basically all the really technical, detailed components of the IT development. And we're going to be floating a contract hopefully this spring, which we then will put out for bid and hopefully get great software developers to come in. But we've really done the hard work up front is actually designing out and specifying the exact technical requirements we need for this system. We then need about a year of software development and testing, and we're hopefully to release these components next summer. So the summer, mid-year of fiscal year 2017 is when these new final components of CDSI will be up and running.
Okay. All right, Ms. Pingree.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the upgrade you're bringing to many of the initiatives at the department and trying to think about how farmers and ranchers can access these programs in a more efficient way. So I appreciate your thinking on that. I just want to talk about one program right now. I'm a big fan of the EQUIP program, and I'm interested, though, in the organic initiative. So that's been very popular, as you know, in a state like mine. But the participation in the organic initiative has been declining. In 2013, we had 90 organic farmers who participated, and a year later there were only 31. This trend seems to be happening at a national level. In 2011, nationally, there were 1,600 participants and only 388 in 2014. So I think there must be some hurdles in there. So I'm just interested to know what are the things that you are doing to address any barriers that people are facing? What improvements could you make by the end of this fiscal year? Will you have some organic stakeholders involved in the process to see what's the challenges are? And are you doing any outreach to increase the enrollment in that?
Yes, is a short answer. A more involved answer. So we're really excited about partnering with organic producers, and we know this is a huge growing component of agriculture, and it's one of the fastest growing, actually, frankly, components of the industry. So it's really in all of our interest to ensure NRCS is reaching out to these new customers. Many of them are new and beginning farmers and ranchers. And the demographics are also younger, generally on average, than more conventional producers. So it's also trying to establish long-term relationships with these producers and their families. We think there's a couple things going on. So in the Farm Bill, it identifies the organic authorities within EQUIP. But it puts some limitations on then. If you identify, I want to be part of the organic initiative, it puts a tighter contract limit on what a producer can get versus general EQUIP. And so what we think a lot of folks are happening is that if they're an organic producer, they're actually not identifying as an organic producer. They want to go for the general EQUIP, which opens up more access to, over the life of the Farm Bill, to EQUIP assistance. So we think there's a lot of folks who are actually organic producers. They're just not being flagged. So what we're doing this year is we actually have in our assistants, we're actually our field staff, to actually identify whether these organic producers or not. So it's not going to then tag these folks into the organic initiative, the official organic initiative, but allow us to roll up actually how many people we actually are really providing assistance to. And we think anecdotally it's a lot of people are benefiting from the program. So that's part of what's going on with the numbers. But that's more of just an inside baseball technical thing. More substantively, what we're doing is we're partnering with organizations like Oregon Tilth, which is recognized nationally as a really professional organic outfit. And we're bringing them on through conservation agreements where we're helping them develop training for us, like webinars, in-field trainings for our people, but also for technical service providers. So we're trying to expand our capacity to provide organic assistance. And then we're really trying to push out and develop workbooks and training for our own field staff. So ultimately, what we want long-term is no matter where you are, so whether you're in Maine or you're in Ohio or you're in Florida, if you walk in a field office, that field office is at least familiar with organic agriculture. They don't necessarily have to be the expert in organic production, but they know who to call in the NRCS team to give you that expert assistance. And so we're trying to build up that in-house NRCS capacity. We really can provide that professional expert assistance on organic production for producers. So for example, we released in partnership with some of the organic industry and with AMS, the Ag Marketing Service, we developed an NRCS AMS organic handbook, which is now available to all of our field offices. And it lines up the National Organic Program standards with all the NRCS conservation practice standards, does the crosswalk. So that makes it really easy for a non-expert, in our field offices to just do that easy crosswalk and help producer plan and implement conservation, whether it's soil management, pest management, nutrient management, water management. So we're really excited about the handbook, and it's an example of how we're trying to take seriously our responsibility for organic production, but also trying to expand access for producers.
So the other initiatives that you're working on and some of the training, what's the timeline for that?
It's ongoing. So we're investing in this. We've been doing this, for example, with Oregon Tilth now for a couple of years, and we're also trying to look for additional, not just Oregon Tilth, but other organic providers that have the technical expertise, that have the capacity to work with us. And so if I'd like to open up here, if you in particular in New England and your state know of some of those groups, we'd be very interested in talking to them about partnering with them, looking at how we can arrange into contribution agreements or cooperative agreements to provide enhanced training opportunities. So we're completely open to expanding the suite of partners that we're working with to provide that training.
Great. We'd be happy to suggest a couple of other organizations around the country that have, fairly broad reach, or at least the depth of capacity to perhaps work with you on that. And I do just want to say I appreciate your understanding of what a huge opportunity this has become for farmers, and how critical it is that the USDA responds to the technical assistant kind of needs and the programs like EQIP, which can make a big difference when a farmer has an opportunity to get into a new market, might be a chance to make more money at what they're doing, but needs that little bit of assistance. So thank you for that. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Weller, thank you for joining our committee today. I appreciated your comments in your opening statement regarding Kansas and the Ogallala Aquifer, and I thought maybe, as we discuss how to continue the agriculture and way of life in rural Kansas and in many states that are affected by that, of course, your efforts there are critical. And I thought if you might share with us what you think some of the key factors will be, or objectives related to that aquifer that people in my home state need to be aware of, and how how we can work together to ensure that is sustainable over the long term.
Right. So we're trying to bring more of first understanding what the business objectives of the farmer. So we're not going to come on an operation and say thou shall. It's more of that open conversation. What are you interested in doing, and what's your what's your family's long-term management goals for your farm? And then what we offer is a suite of different approaches to help improve, if they're already irrigating, improve the efficiency of the irrigation. So essentially, cliche, it's more crop per drop. And so trying to implement, whether it's basic practices like putting on different types of, if you have a spray rig, more efficient nozzles, so you're losing less water through evaporation and ensuring more water is applied to the soil. But also in bringing more enhanced technology solutions. So, for example, soil moisture probes, so that you know exactly when you need to apply irrigation water and when your crops don't need irrigation water, and what the soil, what's the water depth in the soil profile, where it is it getting to the root zone, where it needs to get to the root zone, what's the stress in your crop, so you're basically maximizing yield with the least amount of water. But we're also offering, beyond just water management solutions, is soil health management solutions, which we think is really critical for the long term. And so there are 4 basic principles to soil health. It's the tillage, and so we're really suggesting no-till or minimum till, so basically don't disturb the soil. Cover the soil for as long as possible, so it's good residue management. Feed the soil, so all the biota, the critters that live below the surface of the soil that the crops actually depend upon for the nutrient exchange with their roots, that you bring diversity, like with cover crops and good effective crop rotation, and that you're feeding them over a long-term period. So really, the plants are taking energy from the sun and injecting that energy, transferring it into the soil profile. Have a living root structure for as long as possible. So you have your main cash crop, but then consider other resources like a second crop rotation or a cover crop to ensure you're feeding the soil over the long term. And what we find is that when you have this kind of soil health management system, you're increasing the soil organic matter in the soil profile, which is crucial. So, for example, a 1% increase in your soil organic matter will create this massive reservoir in your soil profile. So 1% increase in soil organic matter will hold over 25,000 gallons of water per acre. So in essence, you can turn your soil into an underground water reservoir. So it reduces your need for irrigation, and even when you say you're even dry land farming, when your neighbors are going to have really stressed and dry soils, you're going to have moisture in your soils to then protect your yield even during dry periods. So it's a combination of technological solutions to extend the life of irrigation or to minimize withdrawal, so you have sustainable water yields from the aquifer, but then also ensuring your soils are as healthy as possible so that when it does rain or snow, you're capturing that precipitation and storing it in your water, in your soil profile.
Well, I appreciate that description and those strategies, and I think that those are great opportunities for farmers in Kansas to get the biggest bang for their buck and preserve this aquifer for as long as possible, still maintaining their way of life and producing very valuable crops, feeding America. And so it sounds like a strategy that hopefully will help long term. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Agriculture Air Quality Task Force. And I understand there have been several efforts underway within NRCS to develop a science-based solutions and conservation members that not only reduce the agriculture industry's environmental impact, but in many ways enhance our natural resources through improved agricultural practices. Being able to conduct controlled burns is very important to Kansas agriculture. What efforts are you undertaking to ensure that vital agricultural practices can be preserved so the federal government does not further disrupt a struggling economy? As you know, we've seen a decline in agriculture income, and to allow these controlled burns and other things going forward.
So prescribed fires is, in our view, a critical management tool. Whether you're managing prairie, managing your rangelands, but also in a forested ecosystem like in the chairman's areas of Alabama, the short-leaf, long-leaf pine ecosystems, fire is a critical component of ensuring the health of your operation. And so the Ag Air Quality Task Force, we really rely very heavily upon the task force to bring us expert recommendations to review what's happening right now in this current state of the science, but then also to help USDA understand what are perhaps some of the pinch points where fire is not allowed because of potential air pollution concerns. And so the task force is both identifying both the technological solutions, the current state of the science, but then also helping to flag for USDA where producers and landowners are feeling or encountering some of those constraints, and then what are some ideas either to help edify or bring technical assistance to the regulatory community so they understand the importance of prescribed burning, but also the impacts on agriculture when it's not allowed, and what are some tweaks that we can make to ensure that we can appropriately provide for prescribed burning opportunities, but also limit human health error impacts and concerns dealing with air quality.
Great. Thank you for your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, gentlemen. Hope you're having a good day.
So far,
Yep, great. Just want to chat for a minute about Conservation Stewardship Program. In the 2014 Farm Bill, there was a change on this to improve the competitive nature of the program. And in December of 2015, the NRCS announced a delay in plans to change the CSP until the beginning of next year. Just want to know how that timeline is going, and not necessarily that there's a need to rush it, but we want to make sure that we get it right. And in terms of getting it right, I want to echo the sentiments of my colleague, Ms. Pingree, about we want it to be effective. We'd like an idea on the timeline. And we also want to make sure that the voices are heard by stakeholders and input is duly considered, and how you go about bringing in the stakeholders to do that back and forth and understand how this really affects them on the ground.
So the reason for the delay is exactly for the items you highlighted. And so let me give a little background as to what's going on. It sounds like you're pretty familiar with what we're up to, but just for the other members of the committee. So the Conservation Stewardship Program is America's largest conservation program. We currently have enrolled about 67 million acres. And we have a lot of folks that are benefiting from the program, and overall it's working pretty well. But the program, in my estimation, and I think in the view of a lot of farmers and ranchers, but also a lot of our field folks, it's really complex. To get enrolled in this program, we have this process we've created. It's called the Conservation Measurement Tool, which is like this black box flight recorder, but not even us can open it up and understand what it's doing. So when a farmer comes in and enrolls, what the Conservation Measurement Tool is basically gives you points. And it's, at the end of the day, too opaque and too complex to understand really what's happening. So what we really want to do is open up the CSP to make it easy for our field people to understand and sell the benefits of the program, but more importantly for our customers to really truly understand, okay, this is how I'm eligible, here's how I can enhance the competitiveness of my program, of my application. But more importantly, what we're doing is linking the enhancement activities that are part of CSP with the resource concerns. So currently what CSP offers, it's a virtual smorgasbord of just activities, and you can pick and choose across this whole thing, but they're not really working as a system to really address, it could be water management, it could be pest management, it could be forest health concerns. So what we're coming back with is more scientifically, ecologically linking these enhancements to the actual resource objective of the farmer or rancher. So to do that, it's complex. And we were on track. The original goal, the aspirational goal, was we would have the new upgraded CSP to roll out this January. And I made the decision basically early December, we need to slow this down because this is too an important program. We need to make sure we do this right. We need to make sure we do great training. We really kick the tires on this thing in the field, take it for a test drive, but more importantly, hear directly from producers and hear directly from stakeholders, conservation groups, commodity associations, and really do that outreach. So what we're doing right now, we've basically spec'd out and designed the alpha, I'll say, of this enhanced CSP. We've shared it to all 50 states. We've asked our states right now in February, March, and April to get in the field, allow the field staff first to get familiar with it, and then start to go on farm and talk to individual producers that may already have a contract, CSP agreement. Let's show you the new CSP. What do you think? Let's get some feedback. But then also from some folks who are actually signing up this year under the current existing CSP, again, do a side-by-side comparison. Are we getting similar results or even better results? And then we're going to do the spring and summer, do the training and the outreach and the one-on-one engagement with our partners, both at the state and national levels. And then by October 1, we'll have the upgraded, improved, better, stronger, faster CSP ready to roll in October.
Thank you for that. You know, whether it's EQIP or CSP, just the importance of making sure that the stakeholders and the folks on the ground who this affects, that their voice is heard and considered in this process. I want to talk about waters of the U.S., and I know this is an EPA issue, of course. You know, there are claims that EPA, this rule, that farming is exempt from the rule. Ultimately, it is concerning that sites will either need a Clean Water Act permit or an NRCS exemption when things could come along. What is your concern with the NRCS and the Army Corps of Engineers maybe having a different determination of wetlands? And I talk particularly about the area in, you know, upper Midwest is the prairie pothole region, and land is different everywhere, as you know, the topography. You know, while you did not formulate the rule, what preparations are you making regarding this when it's dealing with farmers and the Army Corps of Engineers?
So, to your point, sir, we are not the regulator, and we're really the assistance provider, and I appreciate your recognition of that. The best we can do is provide that technical advice to a producer. So if they're making alterations on their operation, and we think that they may need to go get a permit, a 404 permit, that they really then need to go talk to here's the organization, you know, the Army Corps, the district, where you need to go talk to see whether you really truly need a permit. So our field folks are pretty well conversant on this. They're practiced at it. And they really are there more as the advisors, the consultants, not necessarily on how to address the concerns, but more flagging when we think you may need a permit, when you need to go talk to the Army Corps. That's what then we make sure that that handoff happens. But we're not there to make the call whether this is a wetland that may be jurisdictional or not. That's not our role. That's really ultimately the Army Corps' role.
Well, as you know, this is in the courts right now, and so I guess we're all in a waiting game right now, but there are some concerns out there, so thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much. Let me just ask, and I'll be very brief, just ask a question about, in the testimony on page 7, you talk about the improving the financial processes, and you say, you know, you had the audit and they reduced the material weaknesses in those procedures from 7 to 3. Could you address the 3 that remain, and what are we doing to improve them as well?
So this has been a huge focus for us, and it's been one for, unfortunately, a long term. But I can't underscore how complex this has been, and also how far NRCS has come. So the 3 remaining material weaknesses, it's essentially we have KPMG, this independent auditing firm, comes in, and it's akin to sort of New England Patriots coming in and wanting to play tackle football, and they're the pros. So we have come a long ways, and the remaining material weaknesses, number 1, are focusing on the internal controls over our expenses, and this is principally our expenses in our partnership with the Farm Service Agency on the Grasslands Reserve Program, which is an old, at this point, repealed program, but we still have remaining contracts that need to be delivered. And so we need to basically ensure we're providing accurate, ultimately paperwork, frankly, I hate to say, so that we really are, when we make a payment for producers under this program, we really have the substantiating paperwork. And that's something the department, not just NRCS, the department needs to do a better job of. The second is over our financial operations, really our financial reporting. And because of some of the errors and findings they found, ultimately they could not, the auditors could not tie to and substantiate, basically provide an opinion on our ending balances. So what we're putting in our general ledger, they're basically saying you need to improve your internal controls and your reporting processes so that ultimately we can tie to your reporting balances at the end of the year. And the third is improving our controls in accounting over our obligations and unliquidated balances. And so, for example, we may have an obligation on the books, but we're not timely de-obligating an obligation. So a contract may end, or a producer may cancel the contract, and the local NRCS outfit is not timely deobligating that contract and returning the funds back to deobligated status. So it's not that the funds were improperly used or wasted. It's more of just the accounting isn't happening in time with where it needs to. So it's a lot of very technical, very complex things. And again, this comes back to earlier, and sir, I appreciate you just arrived, but we talked a little bit about some systems we're putting in place to provide better controls over our financial management, the Conservation Delivery Streamlining Initiative, where traditionally we've asked our field people who are conservationists to be accountants. Not a good deal. It's like I don't want to have our accountants doing conservation. I don't want conservationists doing accounting. And so what we're doing right now is in the midst of flipping that around, and we're putting our conservationists back to doing their mission, but then putting all the back office stuff with the pros and upgrading our management controls. So we're really close. So our goal for 2016 is we want to get, I'm calling it 2016, the year we get opinionated. We're going to try and get a qualified opinion on our balances. So at the end of this year, our goal is to get qualified opinion, which means is a fancy way of saying we end with good, clean balances, which means we start fiscal year 17 with good, clean balances. And then if we can maintain our balances the whole year of fiscal year 17, we then end fiscal year 17 with clean balances, which is the ultimate goal line. So we're pulling out the stops this year. We're doing everything we can. We're throwing the kitchen sink at this. So for example, we're bringing in in 2 weeks, all 50 state conservationists and all the NRCS we call allowance holders, basically the people who are in charge of the money. And we're having a multi-day, what we're calling financial management boot camp. We're giving lay people, really real-world examples of the do's and don'ts. And really everything that you do, frankly, impacts the financial audit. How you hire people, how you fire people, how you procure vehicles, how you procure pencils, how you manage your easements, how you let contracts, all roll up to the audit. And so we want to make sure everyone is crystal clear on their management responsibilities to ensure a clean balance. So it's an example of our commitment to really get this right and make sure that the committee is comfortable with our financial stewardship.
No, I fully understand. My son's an accountant, and I'm a physician. I don't understand any of that accounting. I mean, you just got to be an expert in it. Given that, I mean, are you going to hire experts into your shop, or are you going to use the department's experts? How are you going to? Because ultimately, going forward, I think the audit indicates, you need some expertise. And
yes. So short answer is yes. So within NRCS, what we've done, and again, with this committee support and oversight, again, this is an internal NRCS inside baseball deal. We have starting this fiscal year, completely overhauled NRCS's business operations. So traditionally, we essentially were like 52 affiliates, where each state had their own HR, financial management, and procurement operation. We've rolled that now up into, so for example, for the audit, you essentially have 52 business entities writing to your general ledger. And frankly, they weren't all necessarily following good accounting principles. So that leads to the place we're at. So what we're doing now is we have a national business operations team. So services are now being provided for all 50 offices from national teams. So we're now bringing that consistent management, consistent oversight, the training, the hiring of real pros who are experts, accountants, and financial management folks to be part of these national teams. And they're the ones going to be providing the stewardship of the dollars, ultimately ensuring that we're doing a good job for service delivery, but then making sure at the end of the year we can report out our finances effectively.
Well, thank you very much. Sounds like you got a handle on it. Yield back.
Let me go back on the CDSI that we had talked about a little earlier. Are you still expecting the project to cost around $204 million in total?
Yes. And let me just break that down. That sounds like a really big number, and it is. So to date, since we started this essentially in 2010, NRCS up to current has expended or obligated about $56 million. The total life cycle over 10 years, the total development costs are about $100 million. The other $100 million then, remainder, is actually the O&M, the operations and maintenance of the system. So that to deploy the three legs of this new strategy, the total cost over 10 years is about $100 million to plan and design and basically build the system. And then to operate it, basically the ongoing costs that all IT systems require is about another $100 million over 10 years.
The FY16 omnibus included, the committee provided $157 million for Emergency Watershed Protection Program, EWP. to fully fund the massive backlog of projects in need of disaster assistance funds. How has the NRCS administered these funds?
So we are about to allocate those funds out to the states. And again, we're very appreciative of the committee's understanding and response to the concerns for disaster recovery and disaster restoration assistance across the country. So we have a backlog of projects because we're essentially out of funds, particularly for non-Stafford Act emergencies. And so what the committee did, which is really very appreciative, is provided resources for those non-Stafford Act disasters. So we're about a week away from allocating those monies to the states and then turning our local state offices and their partners, critically these are all locally sponsored and led projects, turning them loose to actually do the recovery on these projects that have been waiting for help.
What is the, you mentioned the backlog, what's the current backlog?
About $127 million.
As of December 2015, there were over 110 million backlog for AWP, just that alone. While were no funds requested for any watershed programs, including the Watershed Rehabilitation Program, which received $12 million last year, and the Watershed and Flood Prevention Program, for which you requested $200 million last year?
We have done a good job with the resources the Congress has provided us. So, for example, out of the Watershed Rehabilitation Program, in the 2014 Farm Bill, it provided about $250 million in mandatory money for the rehabilitation program. And NRCS was able to take those resources and, within a matter of about 6 to 8 months, work with partners and identify key projects, the most at-risk watershed infrastructure projects that are most at risk of failure and also presented the greatest risk to public safety, and get all of those dollars obligated into planning, design, and construction contracts. So we're pretty proud of how quickly we were able to respond. And once all those projects are fully constructed and built, we estimate it will protect the life and safety of over 300,000 people across the country. So it's a pretty, I think, significant positive return on investment. We're appreciative of the resources provided in the 2016 Appropriations Act that provided monies, discretionary dollars also for the rehabilitation program. Historically, for the administration, they have not requested discretionary money in the rehab program. And the President's budget cites this as not the priority within the budget. That's as far as I can go as to why it weren't provided in the budget. Last year in 2016, again, the President requested $200 million for the Watershed Operations Program. This year, the administration and the President is not requesting $200 million in that program, but where my understanding is the dollars were instead, in essence, provided or maintained in the mandatory programs. So this is the first President's budget, as far back as I can remember, at least back to 2002, where a President has not, in this case, called for or proposed cuts to the mandatory Farm Bill programs. So the Environmental Quality Incentives Program is fully funded, the Conservation Stewardship Program is fully funded, the Agricultural Conservation Enhancement or Easement Program is fully funded. So the big three conservation programs are fully authorized at their level in the President's budget. And so I think it was a policy choice on where to invest those dollars, and the administration decided to not propose cuts, which this committee understands is in essence then a cost. And instead, those dollars were maintained in the Farm Bill programs and not redirected into the Watershed Operations Program.
Ingrid.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. So I think you know how important a program like this is. I know in my state, in the next 10 to 20 years, about a third of our farmers may exit being farmers, and we're actually doing pretty well at getting new farmers in. But that means that we often need easements as a tool to help make that transition, and it's really been very beneficial when it works. So the 2014 Farm Bill consolidated farmland production, grassland reserve, and the wetland reserve programs into the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. My understanding is that the easement program gets about 29% of the funding under this consolidated program, which is less than it had in the past. So even though I recognize the value of all the components of that, I think the allocation could be more fair given my concerns around that. So how are you working to make sure the funding allocation between agricultural easements and wetlands reserve easements is more equitable? And the other thing I wanted to ask about is also in the 2014 Farm Bill, there was a direction that agricultural land easement plans be developed under the agricultural land easement component of the program. Farmers, I don't have to say, rarely have any expertise in writing an easement plan, and that's really important technical assistance. So how are you supporting them in being able to do that? And again, I can't emphasize enough how particularly important this is when you have older farmers who want to pass their farms on to new farmers, when there's development pressures and communities want to preserve a farm, and we're just going to see that happening more and more and more with the value of farmland going up and, farmers aging out.
It's a critical tool, and we're really very valuable program for us, and we're appreciative to have the authority and the responsibility to deliver, I think, one of, if not the biggest easement program in the country. It's way oversubscribed. So, for example, just on the easement side, on the wetland easement side of the component, the one leg of the ASEP, we can only fund 18% of the funds required. And on the ag land easement component, the working lands easement component, we can only fund about a quarter, 25% of funds requested. So it is way oversubscribed, very popular. You asked about the allocation. This is something between the split between these two legs, between the ag land easement and the wetlands reserve easement. It's demand driven. So historically, if you look back to when we had essentially 3 easement programs, the Wetland Reserve Program, the Farm and Ranch Land Protection Program, and the Grasslands Reserve Program, traditionally, the dollars were about 70-30, 70% roughly, plus or minus, were for wetland easements, and the other 30 were for those working land easements. And that demand has continued to essentially follow the historical trend. So we allocate the funds to states based on demand, and then the split is really based upon, again, the demand at the state and local level for how the programs. This is not a decision that I make or the national program leaders make on how to split the funds. It's really about what the local folks need to deliver the program and what landowners, frankly, are interested in doing.
So it might be interesting at some point just to get a sense from you don't have to do it now, but of what amount of money it would take to get closer to filling the backlog on that, because I think as that becomes increasingly important, and in the whole scope of, what we spend through the USDA, this isn't one of the biggest programs, but maybe some input would be helpful there. I'll just ask you one other question that you talked quite a bit already about the Conservation Stewardship Program, and in all these areas I really appreciate the thought you're giving to it, the reorganization, the modernizing, updating, thinking it through. I think that's just going to have great long-term benefits, so thank you for doing that. I wanted to just look at a small area. There's a new payment minimum of $1,500 for the 2016 sign-up period, and we applaud that. It's a big opportunity for small producers because, as you know, if you were too small, you probably wouldn't get into the program because there were just higher costs to do that. And so when you're restarted, I think that the NRCS should do more to promote this change so that people know more about it. So in your rethinking of this, have you included some opportunity for outreach in that? Are you planning to actively promote the $1,500 minimum nationally at the state level? What are you thinking about that?
So just real quickly, first, and I apologize for not answering your question on the easement plan. We just quickly touched upon that. NRCS can help producers develop that easement plan, and the partner can also develop it. So it's something, it doesn't need to be really wonky and complex. It's something that we think is easy to do, and we really want it to be substantive, but we're not expecting an individual landowner to have to come up with his or her own easement plan. So it's something that we have assistance. We absolutely will help people plan and then use their plan long term. And it's a living document, so something that can change over time as the management and the farm wants to change. It's really something to help a farmer, not something to be punitive.
And great, thank you for that, because you're right, that is an important
regarding CSP, we need to do a better job of making the program attractive to small producers. They could be small by farm sales, by acreage. They could be suburban, urban operations, but really limited resource producers also. And they just traditionally they weren't ever attracted to the program because ultimately their payment wasn't worth their time and hassle. So we think a $1,500 minimum, which we can support from a stewardship standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint, will make this more attractive, particularly for smaller operators. And yes, we really want to promote this big time, but also we really want our partners, both in the ag community and the conservation community, to help do that outreach, and in the organic community. We think this is a great program that would be excellent for organic production to take a look at and really see how it can help benefit their operations. And so really would like to talk to any and all organizations that can help us do that outreach and that understanding. But yeah, we're excited about a higher level minimum payment, and we think it's going to have more people take a second look at the program and expand, I think, the diversity of folks in every sense who are participating in CSP.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're enthusiastic about that, and we'll definitely also can give you some more ideas of who can help with the outreach, I think. Thanks.
Mr. Young.
Just a final issue I want to bring up, and that is an issue that I brought up last year regarding the state offsite methods, SOSM. As you know, I mentioned earlier just the uniqueness of the land in the upper Midwest, the prairie pothole region. And since you were last before the committee, the process has been implemented. And can you just give us some insight about how those methods are going and a little update on this?
Yeah. So just real quick background, what this is dealing with our responsibilities on wetlands compliance. And in the prairie pothole, particularly the four main states of the prairie pothole region, which is Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Iowa. Frankly, NRCS in each state was taking a different approach on how to do wetland determinations. So we're bringing a standardized, consistent, transparent, accountable approach for doing wetland determinations. And in some of the states, we're doing a lot what we call on-site, where we literally have folks drive out to every farm and do the on-site determination, which is fine, but in the end, it's very time-intensive and very expensive. So what we instead are now putting it across the four states is a consistent approach where we're using off-site technology, so aerial photography, remote sensing technology, and where we can do as accurate a determination as an on-site, but in half the time. So, for example, we currently have a backlog of about 3,300 determinations left in the four states of the prairie pothole region. If you were to do all those on-site, that would be the equivalent of dedicating 24, 25 people full-time. That's all they did. If you do off-site methods, it's about 10 to 12 people full-time to do the determinations. So you can get all the determinations done with half the people, half the cost, and do just as an accurate job. But to be clear, if a producer doesn't like their off-site determinations, they have the absolute right then to request an on-site. So they still have access to an on-site if they don't trust what was determined, and they really want to have someone come out, that, kick the dirt and really see what's going on in the field. That's absolutely their right, and they can ask for that. They can then appeal that determination to do a second on-site determination. They can appeal that, the National Appeals Division. So all the protections and ability of a producer to really get a determination they trust and that has gone through a very solid and accountable process is still there. But we think the vast majority of producers are going to get their determinations made faster, more accurately, and they'll be happy with the determination because a lot of times it's a no wetland determination, and they can get their report quicker, faster. They can get the improvements in their fields done faster.
So how often has an appeal been filed, and then talk about the decisions being reversed?
Appeals, I would say they're a relatively small proportion because most times it's a non-finding. There's a no wetland determination. So a producer just wants that assurance that that's what they knew, but before they put in the tile line or make the change in their operation, they don't want to risk losing their USDA benefits, and so they just need that determination. Unfortunately, it had been taken, because of the huge surge in demand for determinations, it was taking our field folks a long time to get to them, which is very frustrating then, because then you're waiting sometimes months or longer to get your determination so you can move forward with improvements on your farm.
And those benefits specifically being that could be lost crop insurance benefits, is that what you're alluding to?
Well, the crop insurance benefits are now, yes, have been recoupled in the new Farm Bill, but it's really, I was speaking to the NRCS FSA benefits, not necessarily the risk management benefits.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Laurel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chief, it's very nice to see you. I just would mention that we knew you were a star in 2007, and You continue to be a star. And I want to say personally a thank you to you because I had just become the chair of the Agriculture Subcommittee of Appropriations in 2007, and you came from the Budget Committee to staff this subcommittee, and I thank you for helping me get through the 2008 Farm Bill. And it's a delight to see you here today. And was also pleased that we were around for the birth of your second child there. So, and I hope everyone is well.
Thank you,
It's
ma'am.
great to see you here, Jason. I have two questions that I want to ask. One is, the first one is about antibiotics in livestock. And it's a crisis, and we think that environmental stewardship efforts should play a key role in addressing the problem. As you know, antibiotics are routinely fed to healthy animals. They can contaminate critical natural resources. NRCS's land conservation programs, in my view, can and should be a critical role in looking at how we improve water quality and animal health. So you've got conservation activities, vegetative buffer strips, perennial cover. They're effective in reducing those levels in surface runoff from farmland. Practices in keeping antibiotics out of the water supply and the food supply. You've got a group of practices that can help to deal with this in many respects. What I want to ask you in this regard is NRCS able to utilize the tools that are available through the Conservation Stewardess Program and EQIP to support producers in their efforts to combat anti-resistance through management production practices? And is there an opportunity to create an initiative through EQIP or a new effort through CSP that would be aimed at addressing antibiotic resistance? And is there adequate funding for these programs? And then I have an additional question after that on Watershed.
Nice to see you, ma'am.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Antibiotics and really animal health is not necessarily a direct resource concern that NRCS traditionally focuses on. We more focus on wildlife populations, soil, water, air quality. You understand all that. But a lot of the practices, as you said in your remarks, can address transport off an operation of animal waste that could contain, in this instance, biotic materials, prevent them from getting into it's like surface waters. So yes, when we are working with a producer or a livestock operation to better manage their manure and other animal waste, to manage their incorporation of that manure and animal waste into the soils as part of the recycling process of the nutrients, and putting in basically protections around the farm so that water and soil doesn't leave the farm. You really keep all those valuable components on the farm, but also prevent pollution from leaving the farm field. Absolutely. I think they could be a direct benefit on this, but having a specific initiative that we focus on antibiotics, that's not necessarily something that we're authorized to do.
I understand that, but I'm just thinking that with the efforts that you do have, that in fact this can play a very big role in us being able to, again, deal with food supply, water supply, et cetera, and cut back because of the practices. And I would just ask you to keep that in mind and think about the use of EQIP or others to be able to address this issue. And I know you're not authorized to do it, but I think we can get a double benefit out of what you're authorized to do and then what is a consequence of what you're doing in terms of this issue, which is of particular importance.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of our practices, too, really help improve animal health. And so you could have, for example, have a dairy operation where the dairy cows spend a lot of time in pastures that are denuded, that are full of muck, that are not good environments for dairy health. And the conservation practices can come back in and improve the health of the pasture, so you have bird grazing opportunities, it protects the soil, protects the water that's leaving the farm, but it also, frankly, improves the health of that dairy. And so the animals themselves are healthier, more resistant to disease. You have less milk loss production because the animals are in a better state. So there is that indirect benefit that may address a component of what you're concerned about as well.
Thank you. And this is about watershed operations. We're very grateful to your efforts in helping us in Connecticut, given what happened with Hurricane Sandy. As you know, businesses' homes really destroyed, and the shoreline completely reshaped as a result of that. You played a vital role in helping us to address that. If you could just speak to the value of the Emergency Watershed Protection Program and why it is so important for this body to provide substantial and robust funding in the wake of a natural disaster such as Superstorm Sandy, which was really devastating, and we're still feeling the consequences of that today.
It's a really important program, and we had a little bit of dialogue before you were able to arrive on EWP. This committee has provided resources we're very appreciative of, and as you know, after the 2011 Deficit Control Act, previously emergency appropriations, this program has traditionally been funded through emergency appropriations, have to be for Stafford Act disasters only, which limited a lot of support that we could provide traditionally for non-Stafford Act disasters around the country. And what we're very appreciative of, and a lot of these communities will be very thankful for, is this committee invested significant resources into EWP for non-Stafford Act disasters. So these are local, smaller scale disasters that wouldn't necessarily arise to a presidential declaration. It could be a wildfire. It could be a hurricane. It could be tornadoes or ice storms, but things that are really damaging to agriculture, but really to communities. And so we're on the verge of the money provided by the committee. We're going to, in the next week or so, allocate out about $127 million in non-Stafford Act assistance that will go to states all over the country, to these local communities. And to be clear, this is not benefiting NRCS. It's local project sponsors. Cities, townships, counties are the project leads for this. And so it's about removing debris from waterways so that prevents flooding next time it rains or storms. You're not going to be destroying infrastructure or washing out a bridge or a culvert. It could be wildfires in the West, particularly this past summer in Washington, Oregon, and California, devastating wildfires that right now have naked slopes. And when it is raining and snows, all that sediment and debris comes washing off the mountainsides, as we've seen dramatically in Colorado, can have devastating effects. So we can come back in and revegetate, reforest that, put in diversions so it protects communities and homes from flooding and from damage from debris, but also rehabs those mountainsides with vegetation. We have an enormous array of tools in the tool chest, but critically these are locally led projects, and it's about helping local communities and townships recover from a disaster event. And the program is a really fast. We're very proud of how quick it moves. It's locally led and targeted, and ultimately, we think, really successful.
Right. No, it is, and we're grateful again in the help, which is for West Haven, Connecticut, and the purchase of floodplain easements, which was really very, very critical. So thank you, and just the very, very best.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Weller, for being here today. I'd like to discuss natural resource conservation efforts being conducted in the Gulf Coast region. There's a ton of environmental and biological diversity along the coastline of the Gulf of Mexico. And so I'd like to bring up a couple of questions regarding the steps being taken by NRCS to ensure the preservation of these natural resources in the region. I mean, we have 1.3 billion pounds of seafood comes out of the Gulf of Mexico each year. How are y'all working with local fishermen and others to preserve our fish and shellfish stock while also meeting the public's demand for Gulf seafood?
So in parts we recognize the value of private land stewardship in terms of maintaining the health and the bounty of the Gulf Coast ecosystem. And is one of the reasons why in the wake of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, USDA was a strong advocate for participating in the Trustee Council and the Restore Council efforts in the Gulf Coast region. And really our mantra has been, if you look at the land ownership in the 5 states of the Gulf Coast region, from Texas all the way to Florida, almost 90% of the land in those 5 states are privately owned. And those are predominantly rural lands, they're farmed, they're forested, and they're ranched. And so if you care about both the water quality and the quality of life, the economic vibrancy of those communities, you got to start first and foremost with those farmers and ranchers. So, for example, we then launched a targeted effort, which we call the Gulf of Mexico Initiative. You may have heard about, because we like acronyms, we call it GOMI, G-O-M-I, and where we identified 1 or 2 river systems, small river systems that went upland into the upper parts of the state, but really impacted Gulf Coast resources. And there we're working voluntarily with farmers and ranchers to put in place conservation practices that improve their bottom line, but also reduce loss of sediment and inputs off their farm fields, ultimately then reducing water quality concerns down in the Gulf Coast region, we think then helping to heal the estuaries that those shrimp fishermen depend upon for their production.
Yeah, and I heard some talking about the Mississippi Basin River watershed. You know, all the water from all the states along the Mississippi, they come eventually and they enter into the Gulf of Mexico, dumping nutrients and other human activities are going in there, and it's creating, as you also know, a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And in 2015, I think it was probably one of the largest that we've seen in a long time, almost 5,000 square miles. The Hypoxia Task Force only covers 1,900 square miles, the size of Connecticut and Rhode Island, just to put it in perspective. So it's not just, you know, our state, it's the entire watershed. What initiatives do you have? And I understand, you know, conservation, especially in Mississippi, in southern states, I mean, we take conservation very seriously. We want clean water, we want clean air, we want to continue our sporting heritage for generations to come, and fishing and so forth. Is there an emphasis on trying to address how we can shrink the dead zone or prevent it from becoming larger?
Yes. So we have had, similar to the Gulf of Mexico initiative, we've also had this, what we call landscape approach to conservation in the Mississippi, called the Mississippi River Basin Initiative, MRBI, where we know we don't have the resources to treat every acre. You can't provide palliative care to every farm field. But what we're trying to do is then target where there's the greatest risk of loss of sediment or nutrients. And so we generally know through science, and state and local folks know where those areas are, those kind of critical areas, those priority zones. We're then focusing, targeting assistance to producers, voluntary assistance again. But it's hard when you talk to producers, I'm sure you realize, whether they're in Wisconsin or Minnesota or Iowa, they don't have that, I think, emotional, personal connection with the Gulf of Mexico, but they do have that personal connection to their local creek, their local watershed, their local community. And so, for example, that's why we're partnering with the state of Iowa and their Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy, working side by side with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and other Iowa Agricultural Water Alliance, where they're taking a proactive, voluntary approach, working with farmers in Iowa to address their local concerns that may be impacting the city of Cedar Rapids or Des Moines. Ultimately, that will benefit folks along the Gulf Coast, but you're making it tangible and real for folks in Kentucky, in Ohio, in Indiana, how they can be part of the solution, but also see improvements in their communities, but ultimately will roll up to a cleaner water flowing into the Gulf.
Well, we just need to get them to come down there and do some fishing, and then I believe they will have that emotional connection to the Gulf Coast. Thank you, Mr. Gill. Is that an invite? It's an invite for everybody on the committee. Bar.
You pay the airfare, we'll be there. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Weller. I've always been impressed by your leadership and knowledge of this, particularly in this area. I think you got a great great public career in front of you, and I hope you'll stay in public service. I want to ask you a question about the Conservation Stewardship Program, the CSP, and organic production. In my state of California, producers have enrolled over 1 million acres in CSP since the program was created in 2009. I'm pleased to see that the organic producers in California have been able to take advantage of this opportunity, illustrated by the fact that last year 25% of all the acres funded through the CSP in California were organic. That was well above the 2015 average of less than 1% of all acres enrolled in the program. Through the CSP, organic producers can adopt conservation enhancements that address their unique conservation needs, and farmers transitioning into organic production can receive support for their management efforts as they complete the 3-year transition period. You have to be sort of clean for 3 years before you can start growing organically. I understand markets
that also
eliminate some of these organic-oriented practices, including transition to organic cropping and grazing, as well as organic integrated pest management, IPM. So could you
roll 5 or 6 times? Because I need to make sure, we need to be 100% confident this is going to work, the producers will like it, and it's an improvement. We can't afford to go backwards. And so what we're doing right now is we've sent out the kind of the alpha model of this upgrade out to the states, and we're asking our state offices, but critically some key district offices or field offices, just do that one-on-one test drive of the upgraded CSP right now. So February, March, and April are the 3 months where we're relying upon our field people across all 50 states. So we need to have geographic diversity and production diversity, and hear directly back from them and from customers, from farmers, what do they think? And so that's one of the things we're asking them to look at is organic production. How does the new CSP work, fit or not? We think it fits and will be very popular and will well received by the organic production community, but we need to actually make sure. We're not throwing all the enhancements overboard. We're actually getting, frankly, rid of some of the flaky ones, and we're putting in better enhancements. So we think it's going to be, in the end, a much better program and easier to use.
One of my boilerplate sort of questions as I'm leaving federal services in all the committees is what I've been concerned about is how the federal government brings so much to the table at the local level, at the state and local level, and how often we never require those local governments, which are part of the solution, the family of governments that provide all of the services and infrastructure. I mean, how little we require them to be in sort of get these benefits. I mean, normally, you know, every grant and you give private or public sector, they want to know how much skin is in the game, how much you're putting up. We don't ask, and I wonder in your program, do we ask states and local governments to, using their zoning authorities, to, are we paying for programs that essentially ought to be protected under other laws and where the states ought to have those responsibilities?
Well, I don't want to necessarily get in between Congress and a local county supervisor. We don't necessarily, in the programs that we deliver, they don't require or expect, in most cases, that local match or contribution from a local government. It's really a relationship between an individual landowner and NRCS. But there are examples, like we had a previous conversation about the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, where that is absolutely locally led. So that is a county or a city or township. They are the project sponsor. They have to be bringing a match. So it's not necessarily have to be cash, but they can be providing in-kind support, so engineering support, doing all the administration of the assistance.
It's kind of a generic question that I think that we ought to engage our other governments in being part of the solution. We were talking about it yesterday with veterans benefits and things like that, and we can't solve the problem for veterans unless, you know, you have local support there in their communities. And it's just a generic question of whether you kind of rank states. I mean, California does a lot of land use protection because of the, you know, all the laws, the riparian laws, slope laws, all the kinds of things that each city and county have to do in developing their general plan. And I think that may be why California, as a percentage of real estate, doesn't have as many, you know, doesn't have as much in this program, because I think a lot of it's taken care of locally. So there's a state that's used self-help to essentially arrive at the same consequences that this program's trying to do. Those states ought to be kind of rewarded more. I mean, we ought to use this as a carrot and a stick, and I don't think we have much stick. And anyway, it's not going to be answered in this appropriations hearing, but it's just something I think we ought to be thinking about in the nation. As we're going to try to get a better bang for our federal buck, we ought to require that our partners in this program put some skin in the game, or some zoning, or some land use management.
Well, with the chairman's indulgence, if I may just respond. So we actually do have a carrot, and I haven't had a chance to talk about it yet. And that's a new authority that the 2014 Farm Bill provided, and it's called the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And the way we've taken this new authority is to sort of turn what we do inside out. And instead of NRCS saying, well, this is the watershed, this is the forest, this is the county, we're going to come and fix for you. What instead is it puts all of our tools on the table, so easements, financial assistance, technical assistance, engineering expertise, and it asks partners to identify what they want to do. And so it's a competitive program. We just awarded 2 weeks ago the second round of funding. And what's really exciting is that while NRCS on our own, through the appropriations provided by Congress, we've funded about $590 million, we laid out the expectation the competitive projects are ones that are actually bringing match, bringing contributions. And so out of the $590 million, we've leveraged over $900 million of match to then go with those locally designed, locally led projects. And what's really exciting to me, and what I'm really encouraged by, is that local governments are now aware of this and coming to the table. So these are counties and these are local municipalities that are worried about their water supply, and they see source water protection, for example, as a better return on their local tax dollar than having to go upgrade their water facility or their sewage treatment plant, which is very expensive gray infrastructure. Let's put that money in green infrastructure. And so they see this opportunity to leverage federal money, NRCS money, with their local tax dollars to go up and do source water protection to provide better water quality for communities. So I'm really heartened to see thousands of partner organizations coming forward, many of which are local units of government, and they're now have an opportunity to actually lead in a federal solution as opposed to just being left behind or not part of the conversation.
Well, that's the way it should be, and hopefully you'll keep track of those that can work themselves out of the program. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is stimulate self-help.
Right.
Teach them to fish.
Right. Thanks.
Mr. Valdeo.
I apologize, Chairman. I've got 3 committees at the exact same time, but this timing is perfect. I'm guessing Young had something to do with allowing me to jump somewhere in there.
Yes.
I'll take credit for it anyways. Thank you, Mr. Weller, for your time today, and Mr. Young. Simple questions. Obviously, this is a big deal. The NRCS plays a huge role there in the valley, especially with everything that's going on in the drought. And with the ongoing drought we are facing in California, NRCS is committed to substantial investments to help producers conserve water and build flexibility in their operations. In California alone, more than $27 million of fiscal year 2015 environmental quality incentive programs funding is directed towards practices that benefit water conservation and resilience. NRCS has announced an additional $21 million in the Farm Bill funding targeted to western states experiencing drought. It is important that farmers have the necessary resources available to strengthen agricultural operations. What is the NRCS doing to make these types of programs available to the public? And a little bit to add to that, just obviously making it to the public, but working with your locals. I know quite a few, obviously being a farmer myself, folks involved in this, making sure that staff is retained, that they're properly trained, and I've heard that there is a little bit of a turnover in some of the smaller counties, and that makes it a little bit more difficult. So that piles into the same question as well, making sure that they actually know what they're getting into and how to handle as the process moves forward.
So if it's okay, sir, I'll actually will go in reverse and first address your second point. I'm personally very concerned about the level of what we call attrition, people leaving, and it's a pretty high rate. And there's a lot of things going on there. I think there's, number one, there's a generation that now they've done service, and what's great about NRCS is that there are folks that spend 30, 40, 50 years of their careers with just NRCS alone, which says they really value the mission. They're now retiring. But really there's also folks that are burning out because of the workload. And if you look at our staff overall, from where we were just in 2012 to today, we've lost over 1,500 staff because of funding reductions. But the workload hasn't gone away. So that's been responsible on me, on us, to identify how do we take some of that workload, the burden off our field folks, but then also provide them the training and support they need. So it starts with simple things like what we've done is we've scrubbed what we call above state, basically the overhead of the whole operation, and trim out as much of the unnecessary overhead as possible, which is saving tens of millions of dollars in infusing that back into the field. It's things like, and this was a point Mr. Farr raised with my predecessor a few years ago, like on our vehicle fleet. We had used at one point over 10,000 cars and trucks. We've cut that back by close to 20%. Just the operational savings and the capital outlay savings to maintain that fleet, we've saved $53 million over the last 3 years. That's all money that goes back into the field to hire and train and retain employees. So we're really, I care very much about the local field folks. They're under-resourced, and we're really trying to bring both more boots on the field, but also give them better support so they can do their job easier. So regarding your second point on drought, we understand that the drought for California obviously has been devastating. It's a millennial drought, the worst in 1,000 years or more, right? This is very serious. So NRCS has been targeting as much additional assistance as we can, our capacity, we're maxing out our local field folks, but really trying to provide as much that both technical and financial assistance to farmers, producers in the Central Valley, the San Joaquin and Sacramento valleys, but also the Gulf Coast and Salina Valley, really across the state to help them be as efficient as possible with their water. If they don't have access to water, locking down their fields, protecting their soils, prevent them from eroding away when the rains have returned or when the wind blows, so that they, their fields aren't degraded or injured. So when they're able to plant again, they're going to have resources available. So if you look nationally, NRCS over the last 4 years has invested over $1.5 billion in systems of practices that help address water shortages. So basically improving the resiliences of farms and ranch to drought conditions.
All right, well, thank you. And then one just point, not really a question, but in talking with an engineer friend of mine who works with a lot of farmers, something specific to dairy, which is something I know very well, silage slabs. He said he went through the whole process, had a plan drawn up that would qualify for funding, and what it cost in engineering, what the project cost in thickness, rebar, and all the other stuff to meet, I'm not sure whose standards. It was actually cheaper for him just to go ahead and build to code in the county without anything. And so it was, if you think about it, to tie up all the resources necessary, especially in thickness of concrete, types of materials used, metals and things that go into the concrete, does it make sense to have standards so high that it's above and beyond something what the county recommends? And for someone who wants to make a good, sound investment on their farm, do we really want to dump that type of resource? And I've seen it myself on shades, and this has nothing to do with you, but where you see on old farms shade posts that are up for 50, 60, 70 years, where it's basically a piece of wood stuck in the ground, and then now to meet some of the codes, you literally have to dump half a truck of concrete, and a truck's like 9 yards, 9.5 yards of concrete in a footing, and it just above and beyond what I think is absolutely necessary, and obviously the cost and is something that just doesn't make any sense. So just a point that something you should pay attention to and see if there's something we can do on that side of it. So thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Let me just close and ask about some improper payments. NRCS is considered one of USDA's 20 high-risk programs, and the OIG reported that 23% of improper payment rate in FY14 for farm security and rural investment programs administered through the NRCS. In addition, the Inspector General has issued numerous reports on your financial management process and controls. While NRCS has made great progress, and we recognize that, there's a number of deficiencies that remain. Can you talk a little bit about what NRCS is doing to try to reduce the improper payment rate?
And again, this goes back to my previous comments in this committee's expectation for really good financial management. And we take the improper payments issue very seriously. Let me, though, unpack a little bit about what's going on there. I would say upwards of 80, maybe 90%, Jeff? 87% of our improper payments relate to this issue that this committee may have heard about, the acronyms called SAMs and DUNS numbers. So SAM is the Systems for Award Management. DUNS is the Duns and Bradstreet number system. I don't know what the acronym stands for. There's a federal Financial Transparency and Accountability Act, which requires all federal agencies, if you make a payment to an entity, so this is not necessarily an individual, but in this case, if a farmer identifies through their tax filings as an entity, as a business, a joint operation or LLC or whatever, they are required to have both a DUNS and a SAMS number. This is not an NRCS requirement. This is a federal requirement for all transactions. And previously, what NRCS had been doing is we had allowed farmers to self-certify that they had current SAMs and DUNS numbers. When our own internal review teams went out, what we found is while there may have been good intent, farmers may not have realized these SAMs numbers need to be reauthorized or re-registered every year. It's not a one-time deal. And a lot of farmers, their online things is a little bit confusing. So their intent was good, but they just didn't have a current number, or the number was entered incorrectly. Well, that is officially an improper payment. Now, the farmer's done everything right. They've complied with their contract. They've implemented the conservation. We've paid the exact down to the penny the right amount. We're not paying felons or criminals or wasting money. It's just they don't have a current SAMS number. So is that improper or not? I leave that to the Congress to determine, but according to the law, it is. And so we have to then report that as an improper payment. So 87% of our improper payments are these types of instances, where it's more of a technical foul, where there just was a goof up on the number entry, or the farmer didn't realize that you have to have it re-upped every year. So this is something we're now working with producers to make sure they have current numbers, they're educated on their responsibilities, and we're trying to help them as much as possible. It's very complex, but this is one of these examples where I think the intent is good, but the unintended consequences are pretty serious. So if you take away that improper technical reporting thing, our actual improper payment rate is really low. It's something I'm pretty proud of that we can do better of. But I would stack this up against almost anyone else in our improper payment rates. So it's inflated in part because of this financial, technical, wonky thing.
What do you expect your improper payment rate to be current fiscal year?
So setting aside the Sam's Dunn's registration number, I think it's down to 3%, Jeff?
We're currently looking at 3%, yes, sir.
Yeah, we're currently on trajectory for a 3% improper payment rate.
Same number every year, Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry?
Is it the same number every year?
Yes, it fluctuates around that. If anything, it's on a downward trend as we're really cranking down on our compliance.
Do you have to issue a new number each year, or is it
Oh.
like a Social Security number?
Yes, so the Dunn's number is a one-time registration. The Sam's is a new, we're not, I think it's GSA that runs the system for ward management system. That has to be re-upped every single year.
So if there's a permanent number, it'd make things a lot better?
Yes, but we're just,
You're just
the
here.
middle person here
Okay.
is getting squeezed.
Sorry to interrupt, Chairman.
No,